There is something buried beneath your feet right now. Not rock, not magma, not the familiar layered geology you learned about in school. Something older than that. Something that has no right to still exist. Something that traveled across the solar system 4.5 billion years ago and has been sitting in silence ever since. Waiting, undisturbed, at a depth so extreme that no drill in human history has ever come close to reaching it. A piece of another world, a dead planet, one that no longer exists anywhere in the solar system except here, inside the Earth, right now, beneath everything. And scientists have only recently begun to understand what it is. Welcome to Sleepy Science. Tonight we travel somewhere no human being has ever been and no spacecraft could ever reach. We go down, past the soil and the bedrock and the ocean floor, past the churning upper mantle and the slow convection of rock so hot it flows like honey over millions of years, down through the lower mantle where pressures become almost incomprehensible. And there, at the very boundary between the mantle and the iron core of our planet, 1,800 miles beneath the ground you walk on, we find two structures so enormous and so mysterious that scientists have spent decades trying to understand what they are. And the answer they have arrived at is stranger than almost anyone expected. These structures may be the last remains of a planet that died 4.5 billion years ago. A planet that was a neighbor of Earth. A planet that grew up in the same region of the solar system. A planet that, through no fault of its own, found itself on a collision course with the young Earth, and was destroyed so completely in the impact that followed that almost nothing of it survived. Almost nothing, because deep inside the Earth, two continent-sized remnants of that lost world may still exist. Dense, ancient, alien, sitting at the bottom of our planet's mantle as they have sat for billions of years, while above them, continents formed and drifted, oceans filled and emptied. Life emerged and grew and walked and wondered. And all the while, at the very foundation of everything, the remnants of a dead planet waited in the dark. Get comfortable now. Let your breathing slow. Let your body settle into wherever it is resting. Because tonight's story begins not with Earth as we know it, but with the solar system as it was 4.5 billion years ago. A place almost nothing like the calm, ordered system of planets we live in today. A place of almost unimaginable violence. The solar system was born from a cloud, a vast, cold, slowly rotating cloud of gas and dust drifting through the galaxy, and then something disturbed it. Perhaps a shock wave from a nearby star that had just died. Perhaps simply the gentle accumulation of its own gravity reaching a tipping point. Whatever the cause, the cloud began to collapse inward. Slowly at first, then faster. The center grew hotter and denser as matter fell into it. And eventually, after perhaps 1 million years of collapse, the pressure and heat at the center became so extreme that hydrogen atoms began to fuse, and a star was born, our sun. Around the newborn star, the leftover cloud of gas and dust flattened into a spinning disk. And within that disk, something extraordinary began to happen. The tiny particles of dust and ice and rock began to collide with each other. Most collisions shattered things, but some collisions caused particles to stick together, and those stuck together clumps were slightly bigger. And being slightly bigger, they had slightly more gravity. And with slightly more gravity, they attracted more particles and grew bigger still. This process, called accretion, continued for millions of years. The dust became pebbles. The pebbles became boulders. The boulders became hills of rock several miles across, then tens of miles, then hundreds. These objects, called planetesimals, crashed into each other constantly. The inner solar system was a chaos of collisions, rocky bodies growing, shattering, growing again, a slow and violent process of planetary assembly that took tens of millions of years. And from this chaos, several dominant bodies began to emerge. One of them was what would eventually become the Earth, a growing ball of rock and iron, still molten on its surface, still being pummeled by the debris of the young solar system. Its iron core slowly sinking to the center, its lighter rocky mantle rising, still hot, still forming, not yet the Earth we know, but becoming, and near it, sharing something close to the same orbital path around the young sun. Another rocky body was growing too. This one we call Thea. Thea is named after a figure from Greek mythology. In the ancient stories, Thea was a titan, a goddess of light and shining, and among her children was Selene, the goddess of the moon. The name is fitting, because if the science is correct, Thea the planet gave birth to the moon just as Thea the goddess gave birth to Selene, not through myth, but through catastrophe. What did Thea look like? We cannot know for certain. Thea no longer exists as a body anywhere in the solar system. It was destroyed so thoroughly in what happened next that we cannot observe it directly. We can only infer its nature from the traces it left behind, from the chemical fingerprints preserved in rocks, from the isotopes locked in lunar samples brought back by the Apollo missions, from computer simulations that reconstruct the conditions of the early solar system and ask, working backward from what exists today, what must have existed then? What those reconstructions suggest is that Thea was roughly the size of Mars, about half the diameter of Earth, about 1/10 of Earth's mass. A fully formed rocky planet with its own iron core, its own mantle, possibly its own volcanic activity. A real world. Not a fragment or a rogue asteroid, but a genuine planet, orbiting the Sun in its own right. And in November of 2025, a study published in the journal Science by researchers from the Max Planck Institute for Solar System Research in Germany and the University of Chicago added something remarkable to our picture of Thea. By carefully analyzing the iron isotope ratios in lunar rocks and comparing them with those from Earth and from meteorites, the researchers were able to determine something about where Thea came from. Thea originated in the inner solar system, close to the Sun, in the same region where Earth formed. Thea and Earth were neighbors. They grew up together, in the same crowded, chaotic neighborhood of the young inner solar system. They formed from similar materials. They shared something close to the same orbital environment. For millions of years they coexisted, both growing, both evolving, both becoming something like planets. But one of them was on a path that would end in collision. Scientists believe Thea originally settled into what is called a Lagrange point. A Lagrange point is a location in space where the gravitational pulls of two large bodies, in this case the Sun and the early Earth, balance each other out in such a way that a smaller body can orbit there stably. There are 5 such points in any two-body system. The 4th and 5th Lagrange points, which sit roughly 60 degrees ahead of and behind a planet in its orbit, are the most stable. Thea likely formed and grew at one of these points, the same orbital path as early Earth, but far enough away to be gravitationally stable. For millions of years, this worked. But the early solar system was not stable. Other planets were growing. Jupiter was becoming enormous, its gravity reaching across vast distances. Venus was forming nearby. The orbits of everything were constantly being nudged and perturbed by the gravitational influences of all the other growing bodies. And gradually, those perturbations destabilized Thea's orbit. The planet that had sat peacefully at its Lagrange point for millions of years began to drift, slowly at first, imperceptibly. But the drift became more pronounced over time. Thea's orbit began to cross the orbit of the early Earth. 2 paths through space that had never intersected now began to approach each other. And on a day that no one was alive to witness, roughly 4.5 billion years ago, the 2 planets met. The collision that followed was not quite what the word collision suggests to us in everyday life. When we think of 2 things colliding, we think of a sudden, sharp impact, a crash, an instant of violence. What happened between Thea and the early Earth was different. Different in scale, different in timescale, different in consequence. Thea struck the young Earth at an angle. Computer simulations suggest an impact angle of roughly 45 degrees. The approach velocity, far from Earth, where the planet's gravity was not yet a factor, was perhaps 4 kilometers per second. But as Thea fell into Earth's growing gravitational well, it accelerated. By the time it struck, it was traveling at more than 9 kilometers per second, more than 32,000 kilometers per hour. Faster than any object in human history, faster than any weapon ever built. And yet, because of the extraordinary scale of what was happening, the impact did not take an instant. It took time, minutes, hours, perhaps. As one world smashed into another, the rock of both objects flowed and melted and vaporized and mixed. The surface of the early Earth, already largely molten, was transformed completely. The crust and outer mantle of both planets were blasted outward into space in enormous quantities. A ring of molten rock and vapor formed around what remained of the Earth. The temperatures involved are almost impossible to conceive. The point of impact may have reached temperatures of several thousand degrees. Rock that had taken millions of years to form was vaporized in moments. The energy released by the collision was so immense that it would have melted the entire outer portion of the early Earth. Both planets were effectively destroyed in the moment of impact and replaced by something new. A merged body, the combined mass of 2 planets, melted together, beginning the process of reforming as a single larger world, the world we now call Earth. As for Thea itself, it was obliterated. Its outer layers were stripped away in the impact and flung outward into the cloud of debris surrounding what remained. Its iron core sank into the body of the merged planet. Within what we think of as Earth's own iron core, some fraction of Thea's iron core is almost certainly present, merged and indistinguishable from what was already there. And the cloud of debris that surrounded the impact site, the vast ring of molten rock and vapor ejected from both planets, began its own process of slow assembly. Particles clumping together, gravity drawing things inward, a disk forming. And from that disk, over perhaps a few thousand years, which in geological terms is a breathtakingly short time, the moon assembled itself. The moon is the child of that collision. Every time you look up at the full moon, you are looking at the product of the most violent event in Earth's history, the last echo of a planet that no longer exists. A memorial built from the wreckage of two worlds that has hung in our sky ever since. But the moon was not the only thing the collision left behind. For decades after the giant impact hypothesis was first proposed in the mid-1970s, scientists assumed that Thea was essentially gone, that the collision had been so complete, so thorough, so destructive that nothing recognizable of Thea could possibly have survived inside the Earth. The two planets had merged, their materials had mixed. Whatever Thea had been was now indistinguishably part of whatever Earth had become. This seemed like a reasonable assumption. It seemed to match what we knew about the physics of planetary collisions. And for a long time, it was the accepted picture. But there was a problem. The problem had been spotted decades earlier, and it went by a somewhat dry scientific name: large low-shear velocity provinces. It is not a name that suggests mystery. It is not a name that evokes the scale and strangeness of what it describes. But behind that technical label are two of the most extraordinary structures in the entire solar system. Here is how they were found. Every time an earthquake occurs, it sends waves of energy rippling outward through the Earth. These seismic waves travel in all directions. Some travel along the surface. Others travel deep into the interior of the planet. And because different materials transmit seismic waves differently, these deep traveling waves carry information about what they have passed through. By recording seismic waves at stations all over the world and studying how those waves have been refracted and reflected and slowed, geophysicists have been able to construct a picture of Earth's interior the way a doctor uses ultrasound to image the inside of a body. And about 50 years ago, geophysicists began to notice something strange in the seismic data. There were two regions, deep in the lower mantle, where seismic waves slowed down dramatically. Not just a little. The waves were measurably, consistently, unmistakably slower when they passed through these regions than when they passed through the surrounding mantle. This meant the material in those regions was different, denser, different in composition, different from everything around it. The two regions were located at the very bottom of the mantle, at the boundary between the mantle and the iron core, 1,800 miles below the surface. One sat beneath the continent of Africa. The other sat beneath the Pacific Ocean. They were continent-sized, each one spanning thousands of kilometers across, each one rising hundreds of miles up into the mantle from its base. A paper published in July of 2025 described the structure beneath Africa as standing 800 kilometers tall. That is roughly equivalent to 90 Mount Everests stacked on top of each other. And these two structures together, the one under Africa and the one under the Pacific, occupy approximately 6% of the entire volume of the Earth's mantle. 6% of the mantle. Something different, something denser, something ancient, sitting at the bottom of the world, and nobody knew what it was. Scientists named them, as scientists do, with things they do not yet understand. The one beneath Africa was named Tuzo, after Tuzo Wilson, a Canadian geophysicist who made foundational contributions to the understanding of plate tectonics. The one beneath the Pacific was named Jason, after Jason Morgan, an American geophysicist who helped develop the theory of mantle plumes, names for things that remained, for decades, deeply mysterious. Various hypotheses were proposed. Some scientists suggested they were remnants of ancient oceanic crust that had subducted into the mantle over billions of years and accumulated at the bottom. Others proposed they were crystallized remnants of the primordial magma ocean that once covered the surface of the young Earth. Parts of that ancient ocean that had somehow never mixed with the rest of the mantle during 4.5 billion years of geological activity. These were reasonable hypotheses, but neither quite fit all the data. Neither fully explained why the structures were so dense, why they were so large, why they had survived for billions of years without being mixed back into the mantle by convection. And then a graduate student asked a question. His name was Chen Yuan. He was a graduate student in planetary geochemistry at Arizona State University. And the question that changed the direction of his research was one his professor asked during a class. A straightforward question, almost offhand, but one that turned out to matter enormously. Where is Thea right now? It seems like a question with an obvious answer. Thea does not exist anymore. It was destroyed in the collision. Some of it became the moon. The rest of it became part of Earth. It is everywhere and nowhere, dissolved into the larger story of the planet. But Yuan found himself unable to let the question go. If Thea was roughly the size of Mars, then its total mass was about 1/10 of Earth's current mass. The Moon accounts for some of that mass. But the Moon's mass is only about 1% of Earth's mass, which means that if Thea was truly Mars-sized, then about 90% of Thea's mass ended up back on Earth, or rather, inside what became Earth after the collision. 90% of a Mars-sized planet, somewhere inside the Earth, not necessarily dissolved and mixed. Perhaps, if the right conditions were met, concentrated, preserved, still there. Yuan looked at the numbers. Thea's mantle, according to the models, would have been richer in iron than Earth's mantle, denser. And in a world of molten rock, where denser materials sink, a denser mantle would sink through the lighter mantle of the merged planet. It would fall, slowly, over millions of years perhaps, but inexorably, down through the mantle, down toward the core, down to the very bottom of the mantle, where Tuzo and Jason are. Yuan noted something else. The combined volume of Tuzo and Jason is roughly comparable to the volume of the Moon, which is roughly comparable to the volume of Thea's mantle material that the models predicted would end up embedded in the Earth's deep mantle. The numbers aligned. He and his colleagues built computer simulations, detailed, sophisticated models that broke both Thea and the early Earth into pieces, and tracked what happened to each piece during and after the collision. The simulations were more detailed than previous attempts. They accounted for the different densities of the two planets' mantles. They modeled how the material would mix and where it would end up. They ran the scenarios over and over, varying the parameters, testing different impact angles and velocities. And in most of the simulations, the same thing happened. The denser material from Thea's mantle melted in the impact, mixed with some of Earth's material, and then sank, slowly but inevitably, down through the hot, convecting mantle, down to the core mantle boundary, where it accumulated, where it was swept by the slow convection of the mantle into large, concentrated masses, 2 of them, or sometimes 3 in the simulations. 1 beneath what would become Africa, 1 beneath what would become the Pacific. Tuzo and Jason. The paper was published in the journal Nature in November of 2023. It was described by other geophysicists as interesting and novel, as a compelling hypothesis, though not yet proven. More work would be needed. But the idea had found its way into the scientific conversation in a serious way, and subsequent research, including the November 2025 paper establishing that Thea originated in the inner solar system, has added further support to the broader picture. The ghost of Thea may still be inside the Earth. Let us stay with this for a moment, because it is worth letting the full strangeness of it sink in. Right now, as you lie in the dark, as the world turns slowly and the night deepens around you, 1,800 miles beneath where you are, there may be material from another planet. Not just any planet, a planet that grew up near Earth, that formed from some of the same material as Earth, that shared for millions of years the same region of the solar system, a world that had its own geology, its own internal heat, possibly its own volcanic mountains and ancient plains of cooled lava. A world that is gone, that has been gone for 4.5 billion years, that no longer exists as a body anywhere in the solar system, that can never be visited, never studied directly, never seen except through the indirect evidence of isotopes and seismic waves and computer simulations, and yet it is here, or at least part of it is here, has been here since before the first living cell appeared on Earth, has been sitting at the bottom of the mantle through every age of geology, through the formation of the first continents, through the Archean and the Proterozoic and the Cambrian explosion of life, through the age of dinosaurs and the mass extinction and the long, slow recovery, through the emergence of our own species and all of human history. While all of that unfolded above it, the remnants of Thea sat in the dark at the base of the mantle, waiting, in a sense. Though of course it does not wait. It does not think or feel or know. It simply is, dense and ancient and present, a geological fact so extraordinary that for decades nobody thought to look for it. The question Qian Yuan's professor asked in a classroom, "Where is Thea right now?" had an answer all along. It was here. There is another piece of this story that is worth exploring. Because the collision with Thea did not only create the moon and leave behind 2 mysterious structures in the mantle, it changed the Earth itself in ways that may have made life possible. Before the impact, the early Earth was a somewhat different world. Its axis was probably tilted differently. It spun faster. It had less water. And without a large moon to stabilize its rotational axis, it might have wobbled dramatically over geological time, the way Mars wobbles today, with its rotational axis shifting by tens of degrees over millions of years. Such dramatic wobbling would have caused extreme climate swings on the surface. The Moon, born from the debris of the collision, changed all of that. The gravitational relationship between Earth and Moon stabilizes Earth's axial tilt at roughly 23 degrees. This stability means that Earth's climate, while it changes and has changed dramatically over geological time, does not swing to the extremes it might otherwise have reached. The seasons are regular. The poles are cold, but not impossibly so. The equator is warm, but not uninhabitable, a stable stage for the long drama of life to unfold upon. The impact also tilted Earth's rotational axis to approximately its current angle, giving us the seasons as we know them. The longer days of summer and the shorter days of winter that structure so much of life on the surface. The migration of birds, the flowering of plants, the behavior of animals. All of it shaped, ultimately, by a collision 4.5 billion years ago. And there is one more gift the collision may have given: water. The early Earth is believed to have formed dry. The inner solar system, close to the young sun and its heat, was too hot for water to condense during the early stages of planetary formation. The rocks that built the early Earth were largely dry. So where did Earth's water come from? This has been one of the great questions in planetary science. One leading answer is Thea. Thea, according to some models, may have formed at a slightly greater distance from the Sun than Earth, or may have incorporated material from further out in the solar system, material rich in water ice and other volatile compounds. When Thea collided with Earth and its material merged with Earth's mantle, it may have delivered the water that eventually outgassed through volcanoes to form the oceans. If this is correct, then Thea did not just help create the Moon. It brought the water in which life first appeared, the water in the cells of every living thing on Earth. The water in the rain that falls, and the rivers that run, and the oceans that cover most of this planet's surface. You are, in a small but real sense, made partly of Thea. Let us go deeper now, deeper into what Tuzo and Jason actually are, and what scientists are trying to understand about them. Because even if the Thea hypothesis is correct, even if these structures are indeed remnants of the lost planet, there is still an enormous amount that we do not know. The seismic data that revealed their existence tells us several things. It tells us they are there. It tells us they are large. It tells us seismic waves slow down when they pass through them, which means they are denser or different in composition from the surrounding mantle. It tells us their approximate shape and size and location. What the seismic data cannot tell us is what they are made of. The seismic images, as one researcher described them, are like a sonogram of the planet, impressionistic, suggestive, but unable to reveal the detailed chemistry of what they show. To know what Tuzo and Jason are made of you would need a sample, and getting a sample from 1,800 miles below the surface of the Earth is currently impossible. The deepest borehole ever drilled by human beings, the Kola super-deep borehole in Russia, reached a depth of about 7.5 miles before the temperature and pressure made further drilling impossible. 1,800 miles is 240 times deeper than that. There is no technology that exists or is foreseeable that could drill to the core mantle boundary. But there is another way. Sometimes, material from the deep interior of the Earth reaches the surface. Not often, not easily, but it happens. There are volcanic features called hotspots, places where a narrow column of unusually hot rock rises from deep in the mantle, punching through the overlying plate and erupting at the surface. Hawaii is perhaps the most famous hotspot. Iceland is another. The Canary Islands, Yellowstone. These hotspots tap unusually deep sources of heat, and the rocks they produce, called ocean island basalts, have chemical signatures suggesting they come from a deeper, more primitive source in the mantle than ordinary volcanic rocks. Some researchers believe these hotspots may be fed by plumes of material rising from the tops of Tuzo and Jason. That when you stand on the surface of Hawaii and look at the dark volcanic rock around you, you may be standing on material that began its journey at the very base of the mantle. Material that may carry chemical traces of Thea itself. This is not yet proven. The chemistry is complex. The signals are ambiguous. But the possibility exists, and researchers like Chen Yuan have suggested that careful analysis of ocean island basalts might one day provide the chemical fingerprints of Thea that are needed to confirm the hypothesis. If that day comes, if a geologist picks up a rock from a Pacific island and finds in its isotope ratios the unmistakable signature of a planet that has not existed for 4.5 billion years, it will be one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of science. A piece of Thea, held in a human hand. There is something else worth knowing about Tuzo and Jason. They are not static. They are not simply sitting there passively at the base of the mantle, unchanging and inert. They interact with the mantle around them. They influence the behavior of the overlying rock. And through that influence, they may be connected to some of the most dramatic processes on the surface of the Earth. When a tectonic plate subducts, when one plate dives beneath another at a convergent boundary, it sinks into the mantle. It carries with it the cold, dense rock of the ocean floor. This subducted material sinks through the mantle over millions of years, eventually reaching the core mantle boundary, and when it does, it interacts with Tuzo and Jason. The cold, subducted slabs push against the edges of the structures, deflecting around them, reshaping them on geological timescales. And from the tops of Tuzo and Jason, heated by the iron core below, and perhaps also by the unusual chemistry of the structures themselves, plumes of hot rock rise. These deep mantle plumes ascend through thousands of miles of mantle, eventually reaching the base of the tectonic plates, where they produce the hotspots we mentioned, the volcanic islands, the floods of lava, the extraordinary outpourings of magma that have, at several points in Earth's history, been associated with mass extinction events. The largest mass extinction in Earth's history, the Permian-Triassic extinction 252 million years ago, which killed more than 90% of all species on Earth, was associated with an enormous outpouring of lava in what is now Siberia, the Siberian Traps. Volcanic eruptions so vast and prolonged that they blanketed the Earth in gases and altered the climate for millions of years. Those eruptions may have been fed by a plume rising from Tuzo. If this is correct, then the remnants of Thea at the base of the mantle have not just been sitting quietly for 4.5 billion years. They have been active participants in the geological story of the Earth, feeding the hotspots, generating the plumes, possibly contributing to the conditions that led to mass extinctions. And in between those catastrophes, to the ongoing renewal of the surface, the volcanic islands where new ecosystems form, the fertile soils around volcanoes where life thrives. The dead planet, buried inside the Earth, has been shaping the living world on its surface all along. Let us think now about the moon, about what the moon means in this story. Because the moon is not just a beautiful object in the night sky, though it is certainly that. It is not just something that creates tides and lights the dark and guided the navigation of ancient sailors. The moon is, in a very real sense, a second memorial to Thea. The first memorial is buried deep in the mantle. The second hangs above us. Most of the moon, according to the current best models, formed from the material ejected by the collision. Some of that material was from the early Earth. Some of it was from Thea. The two were mixed in the extraordinary heat of the impact, and what the moon is made of reflects that mixing. The oxygen isotopes in lunar rocks are almost identical to those in Earth rocks. This is one of the strongest pieces of evidence that the moon formed in this way. If the moon had formed elsewhere in the solar system and simply been captured by Earth's gravity, we would expect its isotope ratios to be different. Different in the ways that different bodies in the solar system are different from each other. But the moon's rocks look, in isotopic terms, almost exactly like Earth's rocks, because they formed from the same material, melted and mixed in the chaos of the giant impact. When you look at the moon tonight, or any night, you are looking at something extraordinary. You are looking at the product of the most important collision in Earth's history. You are looking at the reason we have seasons, the reason our climate is stable enough for life, the reason the tides move, the reason ancient navigators could find their way across featureless seas. And you are looking at the sibling of Tuzo and Jason, made from the same collision, born in the same moment. One half of the legacy of Thea hanging in the sky, visible and beautiful. The other half, buried in silence, 1,800 miles below your feet. Two monuments to a lost world. There is something deeply moving about this picture when you allow yourself to sit with it. The solar system is almost incomprehensibly old. 4.5 billion years is a number that defeats the imagination. If you tried to count one number per second without stopping, it would take about 143 years to reach 4.5 billion. No human being has ever lived long enough to count that high. The age of the solar system is simply beyond what our minds were built to grasp. And yet, within that enormous span of time, events happened. Specific events. Events that had causes and consequences. Events that shaped everything that came after them. One of those events was the formation of Thea, a particular collection of rock and iron that accumulated over millions of years into something that deserves to be called a planet, something with an interior structure, a core of iron, a mantle of rock, a world in the only sense that word means anything. Another was the collision, the specific moment, or rather the extended catastrophic event when Thea and the early Earth came together. When the course of this part of the solar system was permanently altered, when the Moon was born and the Earth was remade and the foundations of everything that followed were laid. And another was the slow, silent accumulation of Thea's denser mantle material at the base of the Earth's mantle, the formation of Tuzo and Jason, the beginning of 4.5 billion years of existence at the bottom of the world. These events are connected. They are part of a single story that began with a cloud of dust and gas and led, through an almost incomprehensible series of collisions and accretions and catastrophes and recoveries, to a world with oceans and an atmosphere and life. The story that led to you, to this moment, to a person lying quietly in the dark, breathing slowly, on a thin layer of rock floating above a mantle that reaches all the way down to where two ancient masses of alien material rest in silence. Scientists continue to work on these questions. The Thea hypothesis for Tuzo and Jason is compelling, but not yet proven. More work is needed, more sophisticated seismic imaging, more detailed chemical analysis of ocean island basalts, more refined computer simulations of the collision and its aftermath, better samples from the Moon, particularly from the lunar mantle rather than the surface, which would allow a more direct comparison with what might be expected from Thea's chemistry. A mission to return samples from the deep lunar mantle has been discussed in the context of future exploration of the Moon's south pole, where the mantle is more accessible. If such samples could be compared with the chemical signatures of ocean island basalts from Earth's surface, the match, if there is one, would be powerful evidence for the Thea origin of Tuzo and Jason. The November 2025 study from the Max Planck Institute added an important new piece by establishing that Thea likely came from the inner solar system. This matters because it affects the expected chemical composition of Thea. A body from the inner solar system would have formed from material similar to Earth. Its isotope ratios would be more similar to Earth's than those of a body from the outer solar system. This is consistent with the seismic evidence for Tuzo and Jason, which shows them as different from the surrounding mantle but not wildly alien in their properties. The picture is coming together, slowly, carefully, as science always does, piece by piece, study by study. Each new piece of evidence, either fitting the emerging picture or requiring it to be revised. And one day, perhaps not too many decades from now, we may know with something approaching certainty what Tuzo and Jason truly are, where they came from, what they are made of, how they have influenced the planet above them. And if the answer is what the current evidence suggests, then the story of Earth will forever include this extraordinary fact, that our planet has carried within it, from the very beginning of its existence, the remnants of another world, a world that contributed to making this one what it is, a world that is still here, Let your breathing slow now. Let the weight of this settle gently, the way all the most extraordinary things settle, not with a crash, not with urgency, but quietly, like rock cooling over millions of years, like mantle material, slowly, patiently, finding its way to the bottom of the world. The earth beneath you is not the simple ball of layers you may remember from a school diagram. It is more complicated than that, more ancient, more layered with history. At its very foundation, older than any rock on the surface, older than the oldest ocean, older than the first breath of any living thing, two continent-sized masses sit in the dark, dense, quiet, patient, as they have always been, as they will continue to be long after every living thing on the surface is gone and new life has emerged to wonder at them. The moon above you and Tuzo and Jason below you are the two halves of the same story, the story of a planet that lived and died, that left behind a companion for the world it helped create, and kept a piece of itself, the densest, the most enduring piece, at the very heart of the world it became part of. Thea is not gone. It is here, inside the planet that absorbed it, in the moon that formed from its debris, in the water that its collision may have brought to this world, in the stability of the seasons that the moon it created provides, in the very tilt of the axis that gives you winter and summer and the slow rhythm of the year. Thea is in the world, and in a quiet, indirect, deeply unlikely way, it is in you, the water in your cells, the iron in your blood which came from the iron in the earth, which included iron from Thea's core, the very existence of the stable climate in which life evolved to produce you, all of it carrying, in traces too small to measure and too ancient to trace with certainty, something of the planet that died to help make this one. You are resting tonight on a world with an extraordinary past. A world that was almost destroyed before it had really begun. That absorbed the impact of a neighbor and came out larger and more complex for it. That carries its history inside itself. That has been accumulating the record of what happened to it since the very first moments of its existence. The seismic waves of every earthquake that has ever shaken the ground have passed through Tuzo and Jason, have been slowed by their dense and alien material, have arrived at seismometers around the world carrying their subtle signature, until eventually a graduate student noticed the question that had been waiting to be asked. Where is Thea right now? And found the answer sitting in the data that had been there all along. Close your eyes now, if they are not already closed. Let the darkness around you deepen. The room you are in is quiet. The world outside is moving through its night. And far below everything, at depths that no human instrument has ever reached and may never reach, Tuzo and Jason continue their patient existence. They do not know you are there. They do not know anything. They are not alive. They are not aware. They are simply matter, dense and ancient matter that has been sitting at the base of this planet's mantle for longer than the Earth has had oceans or continents or life. But they are real as the ground beneath your home, as real as the iron at the center of the earth, as real as the moon above you, as real as the water in the oceans, that may have come from the planet they were once part of. There is something grounding about that. In a world that can feel uncertain and shifting, there is something steady about the knowledge that beneath everything, beneath the thin crust we live on, and the shallow oceans, and the brief atmosphere, there is history. Deep, unimaginably old, undisturbed history. The remnants of a collision that happened before the first ocean formed, before the first rock solidified at the surface, before life, before any of it, still there, still waiting, as patient as the planet itself. Let that patience carry you now, the slow, geological patience of deep time, the kind of stillness that does not need to go anywhere or do anything or become anything other than what it already is. Your body is settling, your breathing is slow, your thoughts are softening at their edges. The busy, rushing, urgent world of the day is giving way to something older and quieter. The same quiet that has always been at the center of things. Above you, the moon is crossing the sky. The moon that was born from the same collision that left Tuzo and Jason below you. The moon that stabilizes the axis of this world. The moon that has watched every night that has ever passed on this planet. Every night that life has ever slept. Below you, far below, the remnants of Thea rest in their ancient silence, as they have rested through every night of every life that has ever lived on this planet. Patient, dense, present. And between them, on the thin and improbable surface of this world, you are drifting into sleep, into the deep, quiet rest that restores and renews, that clears the mind and heals the body, that connects you, in its own quiet way, to every living thing that has ever slept on this planet, to every creature that has ever rested in the dark. While above them, the moon moved, and below them, the earth held its secrets. Good night. Sleep well on this ancient, extraordinary, storied world, the one that carries another world inside it, the one that turned catastrophe into something beautiful, the one that kept a piece of everything it ever was, and still does. There is a word scientists use when they talk about Tuzo and Jason. The word is anomaly. In the language of geology and geophysics, an anomaly is simply a place where something is different from what surrounds it, a region where measurements deviate from the expected baseline, a feature that stands out in the data and demands explanation. The word is technical. It is precise. It is the right word for what Tuzo and Jason are in the vocabulary of science. But anomaly is also a word that quietly carries more weight than it seems to. Because to be anomalous is to be unexpected, to be something that should not, by the logic of the surrounding system, exist. Something that raises a question, something that says, there is more here than we have yet understood. Tuzo and Jason are anomalies in every sense. They are anomalies in the seismic data, regions where the signal does not behave as it should. They are anomalies in the geological sense, ancient structures that have survived billions of years of mantle convection without being mixed back into their surroundings. They are anomalies in the deeper sense, too. They are places where the history of the Earth is somehow more concentrated, more preserved, more legible than anywhere else. Most of Earth's early history has been erased. This is one of the things that makes studying the early solar system so difficult. The geological processes that drive Earth's surface are extraordinarily effective at destroying old material. Subduction pulls ocean crust down into the mantle. Erosion wears down mountains. Volcanism resurfaces large areas with fresh material. Weathering breaks down exposed rock. The oldest rocks found at Earth's surface are only about 4 billion years old, and truly ancient, primitive, unmodified material from the earliest days of the planet is extraordinarily rare. But deep in the mantle, beneath all the churning and cycling of surface geology, some things have survived, protected by depth, protected by density, protected by whatever makes Tuzo and Jason resistant to the convective mixing that has homogenized the rest of the mantle. If Tuzo and Jason are indeed remnants of Thea, then they are the most ancient preserved material in the entire Earth, older than any rock at the surface, older than the oldest ocean sediments, older than the oldest zircon crystals, which are themselves already 4.5 billion years old, older than almost anything we know. They are, in a sense, Earth's oldest secret, buried so deep that they have remained untouched by everything that has happened above them, preserved at the very boundary between the rocky mantle and the liquid iron core, as if the planet itself had set them aside, kept them as a record of something it did not want to forget. Consider for a moment the sheer endurance of these structures. 4.5 billion years is not an abstraction when you think about what has happened above Tuzo and Jason during that time. When they first settled at the base of the mantle, the Earth had no continents. The surface was a global ocean of magma, slowly cooling, the first thin crust beginning to form and immediately being broken up and remelted by the heat below. The sky was not blue. The atmosphere was thick with carbon dioxide and water vapor and other gases, a hellish envelope around a hellish world. There was no oxygen. There was no ozone layer. The young sun was dimmer than it is today, and the surface was bathed in ultraviolet radiation. Nothing lived. Not yet. But Tuzo and Jason were already there, already at the base of the mantle, already doing whatever it is they have been doing ever since. Then, over hundreds of millions of years, the surface cooled. The first true crust solidified. The first oceans formed as water vapor condensed and fell as rain for perhaps millions of years. Vast storms on an empty planet. Rain falling on black rock and pooling in basins and slowly, over geological time, filling the first seas. And somewhere in those early oceans, perhaps 3.5 billion years ago, perhaps even earlier, life began. We do not know exactly how. We do not know in what specific location or under what specific conditions the first self-replicating molecule appeared. We know only that it happened, that from the chemistry of the early ocean, something emerged that could copy itself, that used the energy available in its environment to persist and reproduce. That was, by whatever definition we use, alive. And from that first fragile beginning, over 3.5 billion years, life grew, diversified, became more complex, invented photosynthesis, and began releasing oxygen into the atmosphere, built the first multicellular organisms, moved from the ocean to the land, developed bones and wings and eyes. filled every environment on the planet, produced, after an almost incomprehensible span of time, creatures capable of asking where they came from. All of that extraordinary unfolding of life and complexity and eventually consciousness, all of it happened above Tuzo and Jason, while they sat undisturbed at the base of the mantle. Patient as only geology can be patient, unchanged as only the deepest earth can be unchanged. One of the things that makes this story feel so large is the way it connects scales that the human mind was not built to navigate simultaneously. There is the cosmic scale, the scale of solar system formation, of protoplanets assembling themselves from dust and gas, of collisions between worlds, the scale at which individual human lives are not even a footnote, not even a breath, not even a single heartbeat in the 4.5 billion year story we have been following tonight. And there is the human scale, the scale of a person lying in the dark, breathing slowly, on the surface of a planet they did not choose, a person who learned to ask questions, who looked at seismic data and wondered about anomalies, who sat in a classroom and heard a question that refused to let them go. Where is Thea right now? The cosmic and the human meet in science. That is one of the things science does that nothing else quite manages. It takes events of incomprehensible scale and duration and makes them, through careful measurement and patient reasoning, legible to minds like ours. It translates the language of seismic waves and isotope ratios and computer simulations into a story we can follow. A story about a planet that lived and died and left behind its ghost inside another world. Qianyuan did not set out to tell that story. He set out to answer a question, but in answering it, he gave us something that is also, in its own way, a gift, a way of understanding this planet and our place in it that is richer and stranger and more beautiful than the one we had before. The Earth is not just a ball of rock with a hot iron center. It is a layered archive, a geological library containing billions of years of history. Most of that history has been lost to the ceaseless recycling of the planet's own processes. But deep at the base of the mantle, in two enormous anomalies that scientists have known about for 50 years without knowing what they were, some of the oldest history has been preserved, waiting to be read, waiting for instruments sensitive enough and minds curious enough to ask the right questions. We are, slowly and imperfectly, learning to read it. There is one more dimension of this story that deserves attention before we let sleep take over completely. The question of what Tuzo and Jason have meant for life on Earth. Not just in the indirect ways we have already discussed. Not just through the water that Thea may have brought, or the stable climate that the moon provides, but through the more direct geological influence of the structures themselves. The two masses at the base of the mantle are not isolated from the rest of the planet. They interact with the rock above them. They are heated from below by the iron core. They generate mantle plumes that rise through the overlying rock and eventually reach the surface. And those plumes have shaped the surface of the Earth in profound ways. The African continent sits above Tuzo. This is not a coincidence. The mantle plumes rising from Tuzo have contributed to the geological character of Africa, to the formation of the East African Rift, the great crack in the continent that runs for thousands of kilometers from the Red Sea down through Tanzania and Mozambique, a rift that is slowly tearing the continent apart, creating the conditions for new ocean crust to form, beginning the process that will eventually produce a new ocean. In tens of millions of years, what is now East Africa will be a separate island continent, drifting slowly away from the rest of the continent. Pushed, ultimately, by heat rising from the ancient material of Thea below, the Pacific Ocean sits above Jason. The Pacific is ringed by volcanic activity. The Ring of Fire, the chain of volcanoes and earthquake zones that runs around the perimeter of the Pacific, is in part fed by the geological dynamics associated with the massive structure below. The Hawaiian Islands, sitting in the middle of the Pacific, far from any tectonic plate boundary, are the product of a hotspot, a plume of heat rising through the mantle from a deep source. Possibly, according to some models, from Jason itself. The islands of Hawaii are among the most geologically young land on Earth. The Big Island, the youngest and largest, is still being built by active volcanoes today. Lava flows into the ocean. New rock is added. The island grows. And, underneath all of that geological freshness, the deep source of heat that drives it may ultimately trace back to the remnants of a planet that died 4.5 billion years ago. The lava cooling on the shores of Hawaii tonight, the new rock, the fresh black stone, may carry, in its chemistry, traces of Thea. When the researchers find the right samples and develop the right techniques to read them, they may be able to say whether this is true, whether the newest rock on Earth's surface carries the signature of the oldest event in Earth's history, whether the beginning and the end are connected in that way. Perhaps they are. Perhaps the universe enjoys that kind of symmetry. The very newest and the very oldest, the fresh lava cooling in the Pacific and the ancient remnant of a dead world sleeping at the base of the mantle. Different expressions of the same long story. Let your mind drift now. Let the story settle into the background of your awareness, the way the best stories do, not demanding to be analyzed or remembered or held tightly, just present, a quiet backdrop of wonder to carry you into sleep. The planet beneath you is extraordinary. It has been extraordinary since before anything lived on it, since before it had oceans or continents or an atmosphere, since the very first moments of its existence, when it was remade by the most violent collision of its history, when it absorbed the body of its neighbor and was changed forever. It kept something from that collision, something heavy and dense and enduring, something it carried down to its deepest interior and held there, through every age of geology, through every extinction and recovery, through the emergence of life and the long, slow diversification of living things, through all of it. And it gave something too, gave the moon that stabilizes its axis and moves its tides, gave the water that fills its oceans, gave the geological character that has produced its volcanoes and its rifts and its hotspot islands, gave perhaps the conditions without which life would never have taken hold. The collision with Thea was destruction that became creation, catastrophe that became the foundation of everything. 2 planets became 1 planet and 1 moon, and 2 mystery structures at the base of the mantle. And from that rearrangement of matter across the inner solar system, everything followed. the oceans, the atmosphere, life, consciousness, the capacity to ask questions about the solar system and follow the questions wherever they lead, even here, even to the discovery that the questions can be answered, that the evidence is there in the seismic data and the isotope ratios and the computer simulations for those with the patience and the skill and the curiosity to read it. The universe leaves evidence of everything it does. We are slowly learning to read the evidence. And the story it tells is more than we could have imagined. The night is deep now. Your breathing has found its own slow rhythm. The thoughts that were busy a little while ago have quieted. The day that felt so full and urgent is already becoming the recent past. Above you, the moon is somewhere in the sky, moving on its ancient path, the path it has followed since it assembled itself from the debris of the collision, pulling gently at the earth as it goes, raising the tides a little, holding the axis of the planet steady, doing what it has always done. Below you, 1,800 miles below, Tuzo and Jason rest in their dense and ancient silence. The temperature at that depth is several thousand degrees. The pressure is more than 1,000,000 times the atmospheric pressure at the surface. Conditions that nothing living could survive. Conditions that nothing has ever observed directly. The most remote and inaccessible place on the planet. More remote than the surface of the moon. More inaccessible than the bottom of the deepest ocean trench. And yet, we know it is there, because earthquakes send their waves through it, because those waves arrive at surface instruments slightly changed, because scientists noticed the change and asked what caused it, because a student in a classroom heard a question that opened a door. The earth keeps its secrets well, but it cannot keep them forever. We are, slowly and imperfectly, and with enormous effort, learning to listen to what it is telling us. Learning to hear, in the slowing of a seismic wave, the echo of a collision that happened before anything was alive to witness it. Learning to find, in the data of the present, the ghost of the deep past, the ghost of Thea, still here, inside the world it helped create, patient as stone, dense as the deep earth, old beyond any human imagining, and quietly, in the language of seismic anomalies, still speaking. Sleep well. You are resting on a planet with a story deeper than any book. A story written in the chemistry of rocks and the behavior of seismic waves and the composition of lunar samples. A story that began before any eye existed to see it and continues still. Below you, the remnants of a dead world endure. Above you, the child of the same collision crosses the sky. And, between them, breathing slowly in the dark, you rest, part of the ongoing story, one of the countless lives that this improbable, collision-built, Thea-carrying world has made possible. Let that be enough. Let the depth of it carry you, down into sleep, into rest, into the quiet dark that restores everything. Good night. There is a detail about Thea that most people never hear, a detail that makes the story even stranger, even more intimate, even more connected to the world we live in now. The iron in your blood came from supernovae, stars that exploded billions of years before the solar system existed, seeding the galaxy with heavy elements that eventually became part of the cloud that collapsed to form the sun and planets. This is a story many people have heard. We are made of stardust, exploded stars, the stuff of ancient cosmic deaths. But here is what fewer people know. Some of the iron in the Earth's core today, the iron at the very center of the planet, came from Thea. When Thea struck the early Earth, its own iron core, built up over millions of years of planetary differentiation, sank into the Earth's forming core and merged with it. Thea's iron became Earth's iron, part of the same mass of liquid metal spinning at the center of the planet, generating the magnetic field that protects life at the surface from solar radiation. The magnetic field that protects you, that deflects the solar wind, that preserves the atmosphere from being stripped away by energetic particles from the sun, that makes this planet habitable in the long term. That allowed life to evolve and persist for billions of years at the surface. That magnetic field is generated partly by the iron that came from Thea, and the iron that builds the hemoglobin in your red blood cells, the iron that carries oxygen through your bloodstream to every cell in your body, came from the same cosmic lineage, through the supernovae that built it, through the cloud that assembled the solar system, through the planets that formed from that cloud, through the collision that mixed the iron of two worlds into one, through billions of years of geological cycles that eventually brought some of that iron to the surface, through the biological chemistry that learned to use iron as a carrier of oxygen. You breathe. You feel the air fill your lungs. Your heart beats. Your blood carries oxygen to your brain. All of that biological machinery working right now, invisibly, faithfully, in the dark of your body, is downstream, in a sense, of a collision that happened before any of this was possible. The collision with Thea is inside you, not as metaphor, as chemistry, as the actual atomic history of the matter that makes you up. Some small fraction of the iron in your blood was once inside a planet that no longer exists, was once part of the core of Thea, before Thea ceased to exist and its material became part of the world that eventually gave rise to you. We talk about being connected to the cosmos, about being stardust, about the universe being inside us. These are true things, and they are beautiful, but they can feel abstract, distant. The connection between the human body and the exploded stars of billions of years ago is real, but hard to feel directly. This connection is different. Thea was a planet, not just a star. A planet that formed in the same neighborhood as Earth, that grew from similar materials, that had an interior structure remarkably like Earth's, that was, in some meaningful sense, a sibling world. And when it and Earth collided, the two worlds became one. Not entirely, not homogeneously. The moon carried some of Thea's material away. Tuzo and Jason preserved some of it in concentrated form at the base of the mantle. But a great deal of Thea became simply part of Earth, mixed into the mantle, incorporated into the core, cycled through the geological processes of billions of years, eventually finding its way into the rocks and soils and oceans from which life drew the raw materials it needed, into you. To understand how scientists are trying to answer the remaining questions about Thea and Tuzo and Jason, it helps to understand a little about isotopes. The word may bring back faint memories of chemistry lessons. Isotopes are versions of the same element that have different numbers of neutrons in their nucleus. Hydrogen, for example, has 3 isotopes: ordinary hydrogen with 1 proton and no neutrons, deuterium with 1 proton and 1 neutron, and tritium with 1 proton and 2 neutrons. All 3 are hydrogen. All 3 behave chemically in very similar ways. But they have slightly different masses, and that difference in mass means they behave slightly differently in certain physical and chemical processes. This difference is extraordinarily useful to scientists, because the ratio of different isotopes in a rock or a mineral is like a fingerprint. It encodes information about where the material came from and what processes it has undergone. Different bodies in the solar system have different isotope ratios, reflecting the different conditions and materials present in the regions where they formed. By comparing the isotope ratios of Earth rocks with those of meteorites and lunar samples, scientists can determine relationships between different bodies in the solar system, can determine whether 2 rocks came from the same parent body or from different ones, can trace the history of matter across billions of years and billions of kilometers. The November 2025 study used iron isotopes from 15 Earth rocks and 6 lunar samples. It compared them with isotope ratios from meteorites that come from different parts of the solar system. And by performing what the researchers called mass balance calculations of unprecedented accuracy, it found that the iron isotope ratios of Earth and Moon are indistinguishable from each other, and that both point to an origin in the inner solar system in the same region as Earth, in the same neighborhood where Earth formed. Thea was local, not a visitor from the outer solar system, not an interloper from the cold outer reaches where comets form, but a neighbor, a fellow resident of the inner solar system, a body formed from similar material as Earth, growing up in the same cosmic neighborhood before the gravitational dynamics of the young solar system brought it onto a collision course. This matters for the Tuzo and Jason hypothesis. If Thea came from a very different part of the solar system, its chemistry would be very different from Earth's. And Tuzo and Jason, if they are remnants of Thea, would have very different isotope ratios from the surrounding mantle. This would make them easier to detect chemically, but it would also raise questions about whether the hypothesis could be correct, because the seismic data does not suggest they are wildly different from the mantle around them, just denser, just slightly anomalous. But if Thea came from the inner solar system, if it was chemically similar to the early Earth, then its remnants in the mantle would not have dramatically different isotope ratios from the surrounding material. They would be subtly different, detectably different with the right techniques, but not so different as to create a glaring chemical anomaly, which is exactly what the seismic data suggests. Dense, different, but not alien. Similar enough to have come from the same region of the solar system. Different enough to have preserved their separate identity for 4.5 billion years. There is a question that sits quietly at the edge of all this science. A question that cannot be answered by isotope ratios or seismic imaging or computer simulations. a philosophical question, or perhaps a poetic one, though not a meaningless one. What does it mean for the Earth to carry another world inside it? Not in any mystical sense, not as a metaphor for anything, but simply as a fact of planetary geology. The Earth contains, at its deepest accessible level, material from a planet that no longer exists anywhere else in the solar system. Thea cannot be visited. It cannot be studied directly. Its geology, whatever it was, is entirely lost. But some of its matter is here, changed by 4.5 billion years of heat and pressure. But here, in a universe where most things that have ever existed are gone without a trace, this is remarkable. Most of the planets and planetesimals that populated the early solar system are gone, collided with each other, ejected into interstellar space, swallowed by the sun, broken into asteroid belts. Of the chaos of bodies that once orbited the young sun, only a tiny fraction remain, the 8 planets. Some dwarf planets, the asteroid belt, the comets, and whatever dark matter occupies the far reaches of the solar system, Thea is gone, in the sense that it no longer orbits the sun. It no longer exists as a discrete planetary body. Its fate was unusual even among the fates of lost worlds. It did not simply break apart and scatter. It merged, became part of something larger, contributed its iron to a core, contributed its mantle material to 2 deep anomalies, contributed its collision energy to the formation of a moon, contributed, perhaps, its water to oceans. It is gone and it is here simultaneously, the way a river is gone when it reaches the sea, and also still present in the water and the salt and the sediment it carried there. The way a star is gone when it explodes, and also present in every atom of heavy element that the explosion scattered across the galaxy. Thea is gone, and it is here, in the moon, in the deep mantle, in the iron at the center of the Earth, in the water of the oceans, in the stable tilt of the planet's axis, in the existence of the magnetic field, in the seasons, in the tides, in the life that all of these things made possible. Nothing in the universe is truly lost. It only changes form. Scientists have a name for the collision. They call it the giant impact, or sometimes, with a slightly more dramatic flair, the big whack. The big whack. It is an almost comically casual name for the most consequential event in Earth's history. The event that determined whether this planet would have a moon or not, whether it would have oceans, whether its rotational axis would be stable enough for life, whether the conditions for complex biology would be met. The big whack. Scientists are allowed to have a sense of humor about the things they study, even the most consequential things. Perhaps especially the most consequential things, because the alternative, treating every aspect of the universe with reverential solemnity, would be exhausting and would miss something important about science. Science is, among other things, a sustained act of curiosity, an ongoing conversation between human minds and a universe that consistently turns out to be stranger and more interesting than expected. The giant impact is an example of that strangeness. The hypothesis was proposed in the mid-1970s. It was not immediately accepted. It took decades of accumulating evidence from lunar samples and computer simulations and isotope analysis to build the case to its current level of confidence. And even now, details remain uncertain. The exact size and composition of Thea, the precise angle and velocity of the impact, the question of how completely the two planets' material mixed, and now the question of what is hiding in the deep mantle. Science is always mid-story. That is one of the things that makes it endlessly interesting. There is no final chapter, no moment when everything is known and the inquiry can rest. Each answer opens new questions. Each solved mystery reveals a deeper unsolved one. The story of Thea and the giant impact, and Tuzo and Jason, will continue to unfold for decades and centuries to come. New missions to the moon will bring back new samples. Better seismic networks will provide better images of the deep mantle. More sophisticated computer simulations will refine our understanding of how planetary collisions unfold. Geochemists will develop more sensitive techniques for detecting the isotopic signatures of ancient material in volcanic rocks, and gradually the picture will sharpen. The ghost of Thea will become clearer. Not fully visible, perhaps never fully visible, but closer, more legible, better understood. One of the researchers at the heart of this story, Qian Yuan, described his starting point as a simple question from a classroom. A question so basic it might seem like it had been answered. Where is Thea right now? But basic questions are often the most powerful ones. They are the questions that carry the most potential, because they have not been burdened yet with layers of assumption and accepted wisdom. The question, where is Thea right now, is powerful precisely because the assumed answer is nowhere. It doesn't exist anymore. We all know that. Let's move on to more interesting questions. But Yuan did not move on. He sat with the question. He followed it. He worked out what the physics and chemistry of the giant impact would predict. He noticed that the predicted location of Thea's material at the base of the mantle coincided with features that geophysicists had known about for 50 years without understanding. He built the computer simulations that showed how the scenario could work, and he wrote a paper that gave scientists a new way to think about two of the most mysterious features of our planet, all from sitting with a simple question long enough to really hear it. This is what curiosity looks like in practice. Not grand pronouncements, not dramatic breakthroughs in isolation, but the patient, careful, sustained following of a question wherever it leads. The willingness to take seriously something that others have set aside. The attention to detail that notices when numbers align. When the volume of two mysterious structures matches the predicted volume of remnant planetary material. When the pieces fit together in a way that suggests something true. Science is built from these moments. Not all at once, but one question at a time, one careful measurement at a time, one simulation, one paper, one alignment of numbers at a time. And from those accumulated moments, something extraordinary emerges. A picture of the universe as it actually is, strange beyond imagining, ancient beyond comprehension, violent in its past and mostly quiet now. Built from collisions and catastrophes and the slow, patient work of time, carrying inside itself, at every scale, the record of what it has been, including inside the Earth, including inside Tuzo and Jason, including in traces too small to measure with certainty inside you. The night continues around you. The world turns slowly on its axis. The axis that the collision with Thea helped to set. The axis that the moon helps to keep stable. The axis around which all the seasons of all the years of all the life on this planet have organized themselves. Your body is at rest. The extraordinary machinery of biology is doing its quiet nighttime work. Cells repairing themselves, memories consolidating, the brain cycling through its sleep stages, all of it happening without your direction, without your awareness. The deep intelligence of the body doing what it has always done in the dark and far below, as they have been through every night of every life, Tuzo and Jason endure. Not watching, not aware, not doing anything in any meaningful sense, just existing, with the profound, uncomplicated, inarguable existence of matter that has been in the same place for 4.5 billion years. There is something restful about that kind of existence. Something that the restless, always moving, always thinking human mind can find almost enviable to simply be somewhere. To occupy a place in the universe without needing to justify it or explain it or understand it. To have arrived there through circumstances so ancient and so vast that the question of how or why feels beside the point. You are also in a place, not for 4.5 billion years, not with the density and endurance of deep mantle material, but for the span of a night, in a particular bed, in a particular room, in a particular place, on the surface of this extraordinary planet. Let that be enough for now. Let the being, somewhere, be sufficient. Let the weight of the night hold you in place. Let your breathing do what it does on its own. The story of Thea and the collision and the mantle structures will still be there tomorrow. The seismic waves will still be passing through Tuzo and Jason. The moon will still be crossing the sky. The researchers will still be measuring and modeling and asking their careful questions. All of it will continue. And you, resting here in the dark, on the thin crust of a planet with a 4.5 billion year old secret at its base, will be rested by morning, ready for whatever the next day asks of you. That is enough, more than enough. Sleep now, drift down, into the dark, into rest, into the quiet that comes when the story stops for the night and leaves you in the simple peace of being alive on this ancient, collision-built, extraordinary world. Good night. There is a concept in geology called deep time. It was popularized by the writer John McPhee, who borrowed it from the geologists who first began to grasp the true age of the Earth in the 18th and 19th centuries. Before that, most people in the Western world assumed the Earth was only a few thousand years old. The biblical chronologies that had shaped their understanding pointed to a creation event not very far in the past. The world was young, its history was short. Human existence was a significant fraction of the total time available. Then geologists began to look at rock, at the layers of sediment laid down over time, at the thickness of those layers, at the rates at which sediment accumulates. At the time it would take for the observed layering to be deposited, and the numbers they got were not thousands of years. They were millions, then hundreds of millions, then more. The geologist James Hutton, often called the father of modern geology, looked at the rock record in the late 18th century and wrote that he saw no vestige of a beginning and no prospect of an end. The Earth, to his eyes and mind, was so old that its age was effectively incomprehensible, so vast as to be beyond meaningful human grasp. He was right, and in the 2 centuries since Hutton, we have only confirmed and extended that vastness. Radioactive dating techniques have given us precise ages for rocks. We know the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, to a precision of about 1%. We know the solar system is 4.6 billion years old. We know the universe is 13.8 billion years old. These numbers are exactly as incomprehensible as Hutton suggested they would be. No human mind can truly feel 4.5 billion years. We can manipulate the number mathematically. We can compare it to other large numbers. We can note that if the age of the Earth were compressed into a single calendar year, humans would not appear until the last few hours of the last day of December. We can say these things, and they are true. But we cannot feel the time. We cannot experience it intuitively. The span simply exceeds what our evolved minds are equipped to grasp. Deep time is humbling in a way that almost nothing else is. It puts human concerns in a perspective that is almost extinguishing. The worries and ambitions and triumphs of a human life, set against 4.5 billion years, are genuinely negligible. Not in the sense that they do not matter to the people living them, but in the sense that the universe does not register them at the scale of deep time. And yet, here we are, creatures who came from that deep time, who are made of matter that has been cycling through the universe for billions of years, who inherited a planet that has been building its extraordinary character for 4.5 billion years, and who have developed, in the last fraction of a second of cosmic time, the capacity to understand something of the story they are part of. That is not nothing. That is, in its own way, extraordinary. Tuzo and Jason have been at the base of the mantle for 4.5 billion years. They have no knowledge of this. They have no knowledge of anything. They are matter. Dense, ancient, preserved matter. But matter without awareness, without the capacity to reflect on its own extraordinary history. We have that capacity. We are the part of the universe that can look at Tuzo and Jason, metaphorically speaking, and understand what they are. That can trace the seismic waves through them and notice the anomaly and ask the question and follow the question to its answer. That can sit in a classroom and hear where is Thea right now and not let go of it. We are the universe's way of knowing itself. That is a large thought for the edge of sleep, perhaps too large. Set it down gently. It will still be true in the morning. The story of the giant impact has been told many times in many ways, in scientific papers, in textbooks, in documentaries, in popular science books. The basic outlines are familiar to many people who follow science. Planet collides with young Earth, moon forms, end of story. But what Qianyuan's research added, and what subsequent studies have continued to develop, is a new chapter in that story. A chapter that had been there all along in the seismic data, waiting to be recognized. The chapter that says the story did not end with the moon forming, that says the collision left more than one legacy, that says the deepest levels of the planet still carry the evidence of what happened at the very beginning. Science works this way. A story that seemed complete turns out to have another chapter. A mystery that seemed solved turns out to have a deeper layer. A feature of the world that seemed understood turns out to be more complicated and more interesting than anyone suspected. This is not a failure of science. It is its nature. The universe is genuinely inexhaustible. Every layer of understanding reveals another layer beneath it. Every answered question generates new, unanswered ones. Not because science is inadequate to the task, but because reality is more complex and more layered than any finite set of explanations can capture. The giant impact is not fully understood. Tuzo and Jason are not fully understood. Thea is not fully understood. And that is wonderful, because it means there is more to discover, more questions to ask, more data to collect and analyze, more moments of alignment, where the numbers come together in a way that says, yes, this is the right answer. This is what happened. Those moments will come. Not tonight. Tonight, we rest. Tonight, the questions can settle quietly in the mind, without demanding answers, the way all the best questions do when they are held with patience rather than urgency. One final thought before sleep takes over completely. The Earth is not a static object. It is alive in the geological sense, moving, cycling, processing. The continents drift, the seafloor spreads, plates subduct, volcanoes erupt. The magnetic field fluctuates and occasionally reverses. The mantle convects on timescales of millions of years. The whole planet is in a state of slow, continuous, deeply patient activity. Tuzo and Jason are part of that activity. They are not just preserved remnants of a dead past. They are participants in the ongoing geological life of the planet. They influence the convection patterns in the mantle above them. They feed the plumes that drive hotspot volcanism. They interact with the subducting slabs that press against their edges. They are part of the planet's ongoing story, not just a relic of its past. The past is not separate from the present here. The 4.5 billion-year-old remnants of a dead planet are still shaping the surface of the living planet above them, still generating the heat that feeds volcanoes, still influencing where mantle plumes rise and where hotspot islands form, still, in their slow and silent way, participating in the ongoing making of the world. The past is always here, not as memory, which is how we tend to think of the past, but as ongoing physical presence. The universe does not forget anything. It only changes the form in which it holds what has happened. The light from ancient stars still travels through space. The heat from the formation of the solar system still radiates from the Earth's interior. The chemistry of ancient collisions still shows up in the isotope ratios of modern rocks. The structures formed in the first moments of the Earth's existence still sit at the base of the mantle. Everything that has ever happened is still here in some form, changed, transformed, sometimes almost unrecognizable, but present in the atoms, in the structures, in the ongoing consequences of ancient events. The Big Whack is still happening, in a sense. Every volcanic eruption fed by a plume from Tuzo or Jason. Every tide pulled by the moon that the collision created. Every season shaped by the axial tilt that the impact set. Every breath drawn by every living thing in an atmosphere that the moon helped to preserve. The Big Whack is still happening, including in the warmth of the planet you are resting on, including in the steady pull of gravity that keeps you on its surface, including in the night that has fallen and the morning that will come. All of it downstream of that ancient collision. All of it carrying, in ways too distant and too complex to trace directly, some consequence of the moment when a planet named for a Greek goddess struck the young Earth and changed everything forever. That is the world you are resting in tonight. That is the ground beneath you. That is the sky above you. That is the moon that may or may not be visible from where you are, making its patient crossing of the heavens. Sleep now. Let the deep time carry you. Let the patience of the earth be your patience for this night. Let the stillness of 4.5 billion years of preserved mantle material be a kind of quiet company as you rest. Tuzo and Jason have been waiting for 4.5 billion years. They can wait through one more night, and in the morning, when light comes and the world stirs again, they will still be there, as they have always been, as they will continue to be, patient, dense, ancient, present, the secret at the center of the world. Good night. Perhaps the most extraordinary thing about Tuzo and Jason is not that they exist, it is that we found them at all. Think about what it took. It took the development of seismology, the science of earthquake waves, which itself required the building of sensitive instruments capable of detecting the faint tremors of distant earthquakes. Instruments developed over the course of the 20th century, spread across the globe, recording the passage of seismic waves through the deep earth for decades. It took the development of computational power capable of analyzing those records and constructing a three-dimensional image of the planet's interior. Images that revealed, fuzzily but unmistakably, two regions where the waves slowed down, two anomalies, two mysteries, waiting to be explained. It took the development of the giant impact hypothesis itself, the slow accumulation of evidence from lunar samples, the Apollo missions that brought those samples back to Earth, the laboratories that developed the techniques to analyze them, the scientists who built the models of how a planetary collision would unfold and what it would leave behind. It took a graduate school classroom, a professor's offhand question, a student who could not let it go. All of that, over decades and generations of scientific work, to arrive at the hypothesis that two continent-sized structures at the base of the Earth's mantle are the remnants of the planet that helped create the moon. The path from question to answer is rarely direct. It runs through laboratories and lecture halls and failed experiments and competing hypotheses and decades of careful measurement. It runs through the work of thousands of scientists who contributed pieces of the puzzle without knowing how the pieces would eventually fit together. It runs through the kind of patient, incremental, cumulative effort that is the actual texture of how science works, not the dramatic eureka moment of myth, but the long, quiet, persistent asking of questions until the answers come. This story is still being told. The scientists working on Thea and Tuzo and Jason are still asking their questions, still building their simulations, still analyzing their isotope ratios, still waiting for the lunar samples that might confirm or complicate the picture, still following the question wherever it leads. It is good work, important work, work that, whatever its immediate practical applications, contributes something essential to the ongoing human project of understanding where we are and how we got here. The Earth is not just a place, it is a story, and we are learning to read it. The temperature at the base of the mantle, where Tuzo and Jason sit, is estimated to be between 3,500 and 4,000 degrees Celsius. That is roughly the temperature of the surface of a small star, hotter than any fire that has ever burned on the surface of this planet, hotter than the lava that flows from the most active volcanoes, hotter than the forge of any steel mill ever built. And at that temperature, under pressures more than 1,000,000 times greater than the air pressure at Earth's surface, Tuzo and Jason persist. Not because they are resistant to heat or pressure in any ordinary sense, but because they are made of material that, at those temperatures and pressures, behaves differently from the rock around it, is slightly denser, sinks slightly, rather than rising with the convecting mantle, has found a stable position at the base of the mantle and remained there through all the geological activity above. This is what preservation looks like at planetary scales. Not the cool, dry, climate-controlled vaults where museums keep their most precious objects, but heat beyond imagining, pressure beyond imagining, and the simple physical fact that denser material sinks and stays sunk. The deep earth preserves things not through gentleness, but through extremity. The conditions that would destroy any surface material are the very conditions that have kept Thea's remnants intact for longer than the oldest rock at Earth's surface has existed. There is something almost paradoxical about that. The most extreme environment on the planet is also the most conservative, the most destructive in one sense, and the most preserving in another. The deep earth does not change quickly. It changes on geological timescales, millions of years, hundreds of millions. While the surface churns and cycles and renews itself, the deep mantle sits in its slow convection, and the deepest structures of all, the ones at the very base, barely move at all, barely change, barely remember, if matter can be said to remember, that 4.5 billion years have passed since the collision that placed them there. The moon is rising over the horizon somewhere tonight, or setting, or passing overhead, moving on its monthly path around the earth. It helped to shape its face, cratered and ancient and familiar, carrying its own record of the collision. The same event that created Tuzo and Jason also created the moon. The same explosion, the same chaos of molten rock and vapor. Some went up, eventually coalescing into the moon. Some sank down, eventually settling at the base of the mantle. Two outcomes of the same moment, one visible every clear night, one invisible, inaccessible, detectable only through the slowing of seismic waves. Together, they bracket the Earth, above and below, twin legacies of the planet that helped make this one. When ancient people looked at the moon and imagined stories about it, they were doing something true. They were recognizing that the moon is connected to the Earth in a deep way, that it is not simply an object passing overhead, like a cloud or a bird, but something fundamental, something that belongs here, something that is part of the story of this world. They were right. They just did not know how right they were. The moon is Thea, partly early Earth, melted and mixed and reformed. But Thea is in it, as Thea is in Tuzo and Jason, as Thea is in the iron at the center of the Earth, as Thea may be in the water of the oceans. Thea is everywhere in this world, distributed, transformed, unrecognizable, without careful measurement. But everywhere, the planet that died became the world that lives. Let your eyes be heavy now. Let the day dissolve into the background where it belongs. The story we have followed tonight covers 4.5 billion years and reaches from the formation of the solar system to the base of the mantle, to the chemistry of the oceans, to the stability of the seasons, to the iron in your penned blood. It is a large story to hold in the mind before sleep. You do not have to hold it. You do not have to remember all of it. The story will still be true whether you remember it or not. The structures at the base of the mantle will still be there. The moon will still be crossing the sky. The scientists will still be asking their questions. All you need to do tonight is rest. Let your breath find its rhythm, in and out, in and out, slow and steady, like the deep geological processes of the planet below you, patient, unhurried, moving toward rest. The world has been here for 4.5 billion years. It will be here in the morning, and you will be here in the morning, rested, restored, ready. Tonight belongs to sleep, to the quiet, to the dark, to the extraordinary, ordinary, ancient, astonishing fact of being alive on this particular planet, on this particular night.